Hello everyone, myself Gayathri RS, Assistant Professor, Department of Cardiovascular Technology from Yenepoya School of Allied Health Sciences, Yenepoya Deemed University. So today I am going to be presenting about the topic basic concepts of pacemaker. So the specific learning objective is to explain the overview about the pacemaker components, the electrical aspects of pacing, to enumerate the importance for pacemaker placement for the management of various heart diseases, to describe the usage of temporary pacemaker, and to discuss the NBG code for pacemaker. So before we move on to the pacemaker, we have to know about the conduction system. So the conduction system consists of 4 components: the SA node, the AV node, the bundle of fuzz and the Purkinje fibers. So the SA node is known as the natural pacemaker of the heart, which will generate an impulse of about 60 to 100 beats per minute. So from the SA node to the internodal pathway, it will reach to the AV node. And from the AV node, it will go into the bundle branch, which will be further divided into the left bundle branch and the right bundle branch. So the right bundle branch and left bundle branch will go and further drain as the Purkinje fibers, which will generate the electrical impulse from the SA node to the muscular vasculature of the ventricle. So the basic circuits and components of cardiac pacemaker includes: the first component is pulse generator. The pulse generator is having the power source, which is the battery. So the battery is nothing but the lithium iodide, which is the most common chemical compound which is used. The main reason why this lithium iodide is used, that it has a more lifespan when compared to zinc mercuric oxide, which is used in the previous generations. Next is the circuits. The circuits consist of 6 components. So the first component is the output circuit. So the output circuit has the programmable feature of the output pulse, including the amplitude and the pulse width. So whatever impulse we are generating from the sensing electrodes and the stimulating electrodes, that will be got as an output, which will be represented in the form of amplitude and pulse width. The sensing circuits will have the circuits which will process the intracardiac electrogram, and it will include the amplification and filtering of signal. So the filtering is nothing but it is done by the band pass filter, which will allow only the particular amount of signal or the particular type of frequency of signals to pass through this filter. So this is mainly to distinguish between the cardiac depolarization, repolarization, and also the other extra myocardiac signals, that as the chest wall musculature signals and the myopotentials. So at sometimes what happens, the appropriate signals which is passing through the filter may not have the particular amplitude. So at that time what happens is, the sense amplifier which is present in the band pass filter will increase the signal's amplitude, and the device will process, and that we will get as the output signal. So next we were moving on to the timing circuit. So timing circuit has the control of the pacing, the intervals, the sensing and the refractory period. So first we have to know about the refractory period. So refractory period is nothing but when the patient has the normal intrinsic conduction, that is the normal conduction. So in that case, the artificial pacemaker will stop and the normal pacemaker activity will be going on. So only when the normal conduction system is disturbed, at that time the pacemaker that is we have implanted will sense that particular signal, and we will start the artificial pacing. So next we are moving on to the telemetry circuit. So the telemetry circuit will have the communication between the external programmer and the pulse generator, so that we can program accordingly. Next we were moving on to the sensor circuit. So sensor circuit has a feature of rate adaptive pacing. So this rate adaptive pacing is nothing but, for example, if a patient is sleeping, so at that time the patient is sufficient to function with a heart rate of 60 beats per minute. So if a patient is doing any exertional activity, at that time they require the heart rate of more than 90 to 100 beats per minute. So based on the activity which is done by the patient, the rate of the pacemaker will be modified. So that is the rate adaptive pacing. Next is the microprocessor. So microprocessor is nothing but it has the RAM and ROM. So it has the memory capacity to store all the data which is collected from the patient, and it will be stored, and all this can be used as a diagnostic data for the further interpretation and for further management of the disease. So this is the pacemaker. So this is the pulse generator with the lead. So through the subcutaneous pocket, we will be implanting the leads through the subclavian vein into the right atrium and the right ventricle, and the pacemaker generator or the pulse generator will be kept at the subcutaneous pocket which is created, and it will be sutured. So next we are moving on to the pacing leads. So the pacing leads has a terminal pin. So the terminal pin is nothing but it is the portion which is attached to the proximal part of the pulse generator. Next we are moving on to the lead body. So lead body consists of two components, the conductors and the insulator. So the insulators will be present all over the lead except the distal most part of the lead, and the conductors will be present only at the end of the lead tip. So the main reason why these insulators and conductors are present at different parts is that the insulators has a capacity to repel against the current. So wherever this silicone rubber or the polyurethane material is kept, that is the insulation is kept, the conduction will not be happening at that part and there will be no impulse generation at that particular part. So because of this feature we can avoid lot of battery depletion. And conductors, it will be present only at the lead tip. So wherever only which is necessary to create an impulse or sense or pace, only there the conduction of the particular lead will be happening. So this is the generator and this is the insulated part and the conducting part, which is the distal most part. So next is the stimulating or sensing electrodes. So the stimulating or the sensing electrodes has the capacity for sensing or stimulating the particular energy when required. So this sensing or stimulation electrode will be fixed to the myocardium through two mechanisms. That is the fixation device which has two mechanisms. One is the active fixation, one is the passive fixation. So the passive fixation consists of an attachment mechanism which has fins and tines, which is like a clip mechanism which will anchor the electrodes to the endomyocardial trabeculae. And the active fixation will have the endocardium will be attached to the myocardium through the screw-in mechanism. So this is the passive and active lead fixation, and here you can see in the above picture that the passive fixation has clip kind of mechanism which will go and anchor to the myocardium in a clipping mechanism, and the active fixation will be having the screwing mechanism which will go and screw into the myocardium. So next we are moving on to the polarity. So the polarity is nothing but the electrode or the electrical configuration of the pacing lead and the configuration to the pulse generator. So there are two types, the polarity. So it is unipolar and bipolar. So nowadays we will be using more of a bipolar lead only because it has more success rate when compared to unipolar. So the unipolar configuration is when the cathode, that is the negative charge, is present on the lead, and the anode, which is the positive charge, will be present in the pacemaker can. So the advantages of this unipolar lead is better sensing of premature ventricular complexes, and it can also sense the low amplitude signals, and also in case of shifted axis. So the disadvantages, there will be oversensing. See, because of the oversensing, it can capture all the extra cardiac signals and the skeletal muscle activation can also happen. So even though the band pass filter is present, it can capture all the unwanted signals which will lead to current loss. And because of this, large pacemaker artifacts can be generated ununiform when we are seeing the ECG. So the bipolar leads has, as the name suggests, it has two electrodes. So the cathode will be present in the negative distal tip and the anode will be present in the positive tip. So the advantages will be the less sensing of the myocardium or the skeletal muscle activation, and a smaller artifact in ECG. So it will not, cause any differentiation between the native waveform of the ECG. So the disadvantages is that due to the complex lead design, it can be leading to more malfunction of the device or the failure of the device or fracture of the lead, and since because of this small pacemaker artifact, it may be difficult to interpret. So this is the pulse generator and pacing leads which we have discussed till now. So next we were moving on to the temporary cardiac pacing. So the temporary cardiac pacing, as the name suggests, it is just a temporary mechanism before the implantation of the permanent pacemaker. So it does not have different leads like what we have discussed in the pacemaker. We have sensing leads, stimulating leads, pacing leads. So similar to that, it does not have multiple kind of leads for doing the mechanism of pacing. So it does have only one lead which is passed through the femoral vein and is implanted in the right ventricle. So the temporary pacemaker box will have the following mechanisms. It has sensitivity, threshold, the output signal and the rate. So the sensitivity will determine how much current is required for identifying the depolarization. the threshold is nothing but it will denote how much of energy or the current is required to trigger the depolarization. Output is how much of energy is required to deliver the pacing which is required, and the rate is nothing but whatever rate we are going to program. So as I told you, this temporary pacemaker is a temporary mechanism before the implantation of the permanent pacemaker. So whenever we are implanting this temporary pacemaker, the rate will be constant. So when permanent pacemaker, as we have discussed, it does not have different rate adaptive mechanism and all. So when the temporary pacemaker is implanted, the patient will be admitted in the ICU. So the baseline rate which will be kept for this patient will be around 60 to 70 beats per minute. So that rate will be constant throughout the admission of this stay. So after which, when we are implanting the pacemaker, that is the permanent pacemaker, the rate will be changed accordingly. So this is the last mechanism, that is the NBG code. So this is like the nomenclature for all the permanent pacemaker implantation. So when we are seeing the permanent pacemaker, there will be 4 letters in India and 5 letters in abroad. Each letter denotes each function of that particular alphabet. So the first alphabet denotes the chamber getting paced. So chamber getting paced is nothing but which chamber is getting paced, or which chamber is having the loss of pacing, that is the natural pacing which is lost. So O means none, A is atrium, V is ventricle, D means dual. So A means only the atrium is getting paced, V means only the ventricle is getting paced, and dual means both the atrium and ventricle is getting paced. The second alphabet is chamber getting sensed. So O means none, A is atrium, so only the atrium is getting sensed for the pacing, and V is ventricle, D is dual. So ventricle means only the ventricle chamber is getting sensed, and dual means both the atrium and ventricle is sensed for any abnormal conduction system. So now the patient is sensed, the patient is going to get paced. So what is the response to sensing? That is the third alphabet. So O means none, so T is triggered. So triggered is nothing but when the programmability is done, when the program is set for the pacemaker for a particular patient, there will be a baseline rate. For example, if it's kept for around 60 to 70 beats per minute, only if the rate of that particular patient goes beyond that 60 or 70 beats per minute, it will be triggered. If the rate falls below the 60 beats per minute, then it will be inhibited. Next is the rate modulation, which we have already discussed. So based on the need of the patient, based on the activity, the exertional activity, or whether the patient is sleeping, based on that the modulation of the rate will be happening. And the multi-site pacing, which is the fifth alphabet, is nothing but pacing sites which is there only if the atrium is getting paced, or if the ventricular is getting paced, or if both the ventricles or atriums are getting paced. So that is the multi-site pacing. So this is the NBG code for pacemaker. So to summarize, the pacemaker circuit consists of pulse generator, which comprises of the power source, the circuits, the lead system. So the circuits comprises of the output, input, sensing, timing and the telemetry circuits. The lead system will consist of the terminal pin, the lead body, the stimulating or sensing electrode and the fixation devices, which is active and passive mechanism, and the polarity will be unipolar or bipolar, and the types of pacemaker which we have already discussed is temporary pacemaker and permanent pacemaker, and for permanent pacemaker we are using the NBG code for programming. Thank you.